Hollywood created a Wild West without women, and then created a Prohibition era without them too. But while Al Capone stole the headlines, 20 women built empires from scratch, bribed politicians, funded revolutions, and survived in circumstances that killed experienced men. Here's what really happened to them. Number 1. During Prohibition, one woman ruled New York nightlife like no one else. Texas Guinan welcomed customers into speakeasies with a line that became legendary, "Hello, sucker." And the most impressive part? The police arrested her 46 times. 46! But she was never convicted once. The trick was simple and brilliant. Her lawyers always claimed she was just an employee, never the owner of the place. The authorities couldn't prove otherwise. Texas became such a huge celebrity that when she died in 1933, while on tour in Canada, about 12,000 people showed up at her funeral. To give you an idea, that was more people than many politicians or Hollywood stars drew at the time. A woman who turned illegality into a show and never paid the price for it. Number 2. In 1912, a young woman from Martinique arrived in New York without speaking English and with almost nothing in her pocket. 10 years later, Stephanie St. Clair was running Harlem's illegal lottery, moving around $200,000 a week. This was in the 1920s, when that kind of money was worth a fortune. The scheme worked like this. Bettors picked numbers and paid a few cents, and whoever got it right won the prize. It was the people's game, and St. Clair was the one in charge. When gangster Dutch Schultz tried to take over her territory, she didn't run. She went straight to the black press and exposed the police corruption that protected Schultz. She used newspapers as a weapon. And when Schultz was shot in 1935, St. Clair sent a telegram to his hospital with a line that became famous: "You reap what you sow." She outlived all her rivals and died in 1969 at 73, without ever being taken down. Number 3. During Prohibition, while American gangsters were fighting over territory with guns, a British woman named Gertrude Lythgoe ran an operation that many of them depended on to keep going. From the Bahamas, she coordinated the shipment of liquor to what was called Rum Row. That line of ships anchored outside U.S. territorial waters, where American law couldn't reach. Smaller boats would come pick up the cargo and take it to the coast. Lythgoe dealt directly with people like Al Capone. And the thing is, those men respected her because she controlled the supply. Without her, the product didn't arrive. At a time when women could barely open a bank account, she sat at the table with the country's biggest criminals and set the terms. After 1930, she simply disappeared from the records. Never arrested, never found. No one knows for sure what happened to her. Number 4. Virginia Hill grew up poor in Alabama during the Great Depression, but by 17, she was already moving among the most dangerous men in Chicago. She didn't carry guns or run gangs. Her role was different, and honestly, way riskier. Moving mafia cash across the country and even out of it. We're talking suitcases packed with hundreds of thousands of dollars crossing borders on the way to Las Vegas, Havana, and cities in Europe. No one suspected a beautiful woman traveling alone. In 1947, her boyfriend Bugsy Siegel was shot multiple times inside his own home in Beverly Hills, and she was conveniently in Europe. 4 years later, the Keefe committee called her to testify about organized crime on national TV. Millions of Americans watched as she answered the senators with a coldness that left everyone stunned. She walked out of the hearing and punched a reporter. In 1966, at 49, she was found dead from an overdose near Salzburg, Austria. Number 5. In 1914, a 13-year-old girl arrived in the United States by herself from Russia. No family, no money, and no English. 6 years later, Pearl Adler, who started going by Polly, was running the most famous brothel in Manhattan. The place wasn't just any establishment. Senators, judges, writers like Robert Benchley, and gangsters like Dutch Schultz all moved through the same rooms. During Prohibition, the place also operated as a speakeasy, where the booze flowed freely. The police tried to shut her down several times, but here's the detail. Her own clients, people way too powerful, made sure the charges never went anywhere. When Polly finally retired, she did something no one expected. She went back to school, got into college, and in 1953 published her memoir, A House Is Not a Home. The book stayed on the bestseller list for 2 straight years. She died in 1962 at 61 of a heart attack. Number 6. Mae West ended up behind bars in 1927, but not for theft or violence. Her crime was writing and starring in a Broadway play called Sex. New York authorities decided it was too obscene for the public. She spent 8 days in a prison in Queens, and, according to records from the time, wore silk clothes under her jail uniform. Here's the detail most people don't realize. The same mindset that banned alcohol across the entire country also wanted to control what people could watch in the theater. The same moral pressure groups were behind both things. But with Mae West, the plan backfired. The arrest became national news and turned her into the most talked-about woman in America. Hollywood came knocking soon after. She became one of the highest-paid actresses in movies precisely because they tried to silence her. Number 7. In January 1935, FBI agents surrounded a house in Florida and opened fire. When it was all over, 61-year-old Kate "Ma" Barker was dead. Here's where things get strange. J. Edgar Hoover had a serious problem on his hands. How do you explain to the American public that your agents killed an elderly woman? Simple. You turn her into the mastermind behind everything. Hoover told the press that Ma Barker was the leader of the whole gang, that she planned every bank robbery and every kidnapping, but the people who were actually in the gang told a very different story. Alvin Karpus, who really was the leader, said years later that Ma Barker was nothing more than an old lady who stayed home doing puzzles and listening to the radio. She didn't even really know what her sons were doing. No document from the time, no police testimony before 1935 mentions her as a criminal. The legend of Ma Barker was made up after she was already dead and couldn't defend herself. Number 8. Louise Rolfe, the alibi for the massacre. In 1929, 7 men were executed in a garage in Chicago in what became known as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. The police had one main suspect, Jack McGurn, Al Capone's right-hand man, known as Machine Gun. But there was a problem. His girlfriend, Louise Rolfe, swore the two of them had been together all night. With no way to break that alibi, prosecutors couldn't bring McGurn to trial for the massacre. So they tried something no one had ever seen before. They charged Louise with providing a false alibi, a charge made up just for this case. Their response was even more calculated. McGurn and Louise got married. Why? Because under American law at the time, a wife couldn't be forced to testify against her husband. The marriage wasn't for love, it was a legal move. And it worked. The charges against her were dropped, and McGurn never paid for the massacre. Number 9. The FBI couldn't catch John Dillinger. The guy was America's public enemy number 1 and got away every time. So they changed their strategy and went after the woman he loved. Evelyn "Billie" Frechette, a young woman of native descent, lived with Dillinger and knew everything. The hideouts, the plans, the fake names. In April 1934, federal agents cornered her in a bar in Chicago. The charge was harboring a fugitive, basically hiding a wanted criminal. She got 2 years in federal prison. 3 months after she was arrested, Dillinger was ambushed and killed as he left a movie theater. Billie heard the news behind bars. When she got out, she had no money and no options. She ended up traveling with a show called Crime Doesn't Pay, where she went on stage and told her own story to curious audiences. That was how she paid the bills. Number 10, Pearl Elliott, the invisible Chicago bootlegger. During Prohibition, Chicago had famous names in the liquor smuggling business. Al Capone was in every newspaper, but Pearl Elliott pulled off something Capone never could: staying invisible. She built an alcohol distribution network using ordinary businesses as fronts: a flower shop, a laundromat, a grocery store, everything running normally through the front door. Out back, the whiskey moved through the city. The impressive detail is that she paid bribes to city officials using her own name. The police knew who she was. In internal records, she was listed as an operator in the scheme. Even so, she was never arrested, not once. While the men around her went down one after another, Pearl kept the business going. The world only found out about her in the 1990s, when old police files were finally opened to the public. The question that remains: how many others like her simply disappeared from history? Number 11. In 1920, Mamie Smith walked into a studio and recorded Crazy Blues. No one expected what came next. 75,000 copies sold in the first month. It was the first blues record commercially recorded by a black female artist, and it opened a door the industry didn't even know existed. Suddenly, record companies realized there was a huge market of black consumers buying records. They called them race records. Smith performed in Harlem speakeasies, packed venues, but the real money ended up in the hands of the white promoters who controlled her contracts. They kept the biggest cut of the royalties. When the public's taste changed, no one looked back. Smith was forgotten by the same industry she helped create. She died in 1946, at 65, with practically nothing. The woman who proved blues could sell never saw the wealth she generated. Number 12. Chicago, in the 1920s, was territory ruled by armed men and violent gangs. But in the middle of that chaos, one woman ran a sports betting operation that moved more than $10,000 a week. Rose Keefe worked inside the city's speakeasies, hired precisely because no one would look twice at her. The owners of those establishments understood something the police took a while to figure out. A discreet woman was the perfect cover for handling high-value bets. The most interesting part is that in 1928, during investigations into organized crime in Chicago, her name appeared in 3 separate official documents. But the language used in the records was intentionally vague, describing her only as a service provider. No prosecutor ever indicted her. She operated for years right under the authorities' noses and simply disappeared from the records. Number 13. Long before Prohibition, Sadie Farrell was already a problem on the streets of New York. She led a gang of pickpockets in Lower Manhattan and earned the nickname the Goat because she would literally headbutt her victims before robbing them. When Prohibition arrived in 1920, she saw what every smart criminal saw: easy money. She gave up street theft and started smuggling liquor along the Hudson River using stolen boats. Anyone who crossed her in the business didn't get a second chance. The strangest part of this story is the ending. In 1922, her name simply disappeared from police records. No arrest, no death certificate, nothing. Did she die? Run off to another state? Change her identity and live a quiet life? No one ever found out. Number 14. Celia Cohen. In 1920s, Philadelphia, an ordinary grocery store, hid one of the biggest illegal liquor distribution operations in the American Northeast. Celia Cohen ran everything. She dealt directly with Canadian importers and coordinated deliveries to distributors spread across several states. The detail that stands out is this. When her husband died in 1924, Celia didn't put any man in front of the business. She took full control of the operation herself, something that almost never happened back then. And here comes the part that shows how smart she was. The authorities were never able to catch her for liquor smuggling. In 1929, the federal government went after her for tax evasion, the same method they would later use against Al Capone. Celia paid the fine and moved on. While famous gangsters ended up in prison or dead, she settled everything with a check. Number 15, Helen Walsh ran a speakeasy in Portland, Oregon for 3 years without any problems. She paid the local cop his bribe right on schedule, and the business ran peacefully. Until one day, the guy decided to ask for more money. Helen refused to pay. Instead of negotiating, the cop simply turned her in. In 1925, she became the only woman convicted under the Volstead Act in the entire state of Oregon. She got 60 days in jail. Now comes the part no one expected. When she got out of prison, Helen didn't change her life. She reopened the speakeasy at another address and put a different cop on the payroll. The corruption system that kept Prohibition going continued working the exact same way. The only thing that really changed was the bar's address and the name of the cop getting the envelope. Prohibition didn't end alcohol. It just created a new market for bribes. Number 16. In 1920s Chicago, while Al Capone dominated the headlines, one woman operated in the shadows with an efficiency few gangsters ever matched. Jennie Rogers controlled brothels and speakeasies in a territory where competition was settled in very final ways. The detail that stands out is this. At least 4 women who came into direct conflict with her ended up dead from supposed natural causes in a period too short to be a coincidence. All young, all healthy. And here comes the part that's really disturbing. The same private doctor signed every death certificate. No autopsy was requested. No detective knocked on her door. In 1929, Jennie herself also died of natural causes. Her considerable fortune was inherited by a nephew no one in her circle had ever seen or heard of. Too convenient, don't you think? Number 17. Billie Holiday was 15 when she started singing in Harlem speakeasies in 1930. Back then, Prohibition had turned New York into a city of hidden doors and whispered passwords. Eleanora Fagan, her real name, made $18 a week in those places. For a young black woman with no education during the Great Depression, that was more money than any other job offered. But those speakeasies weren't glamorous stages. They were run by gangsters who controlled everything, from the illegal whiskey to the singers. That was the world where she learned to survive and turn pain into music. 9 years later, in 1939, she recorded Strange Fruit, a song about lynchings in the South that radio stations refused to play. The violence she described in those lyrics didn't just come from newspapers. It came from what she lived through from those early years in Harlem, surrounded by dangerous men, in a world where the law didn't exist to protect people like her. Number 18. In 1901, Evelyn Nesbit was 16 and already the most reproduced face in America, appearing in magazines and on postcards from coast to coast. Architect Stanford White, one of the most powerful men in New York, seduced her while she was still underage. Years later, in 1906, millionaire Harry Thaw, Nesbit's husband, pulled out a revolver and shot White dead on the rooftop terrace of Madison Square Garden in front of hundreds of people. The trial that followed became the country's first major media circus, with newspapers fighting over every detail of Evelyn's private life. She had been the victim, but the public treated her like an attraction. After the case, she tried a career in vaudeville, faced poverty, addiction, and 2 failed marriages. Even so, she outlived all the men who tried to define her. She died in 1967 at 82, clear-minded and refusing interviews until the very end. Number 19. During the 1920s, Chicago was living through a gang war that left bodies in the streets almost every week. But between 1924 and 1928, several city newspapers started mentioning a name no one could explain: Tiger Lil. According to the reports, she was a woman hired by at least 3 rival gangs to eliminate competitors. The detail that still bothers people today is that Chicago police were never able to identify who she was. No records, no arrests, no reliable description. Some historians believe the name was used by different people. Others say she was simply never caught. And that silence in the archives is exactly what makes this story so disturbing. Number 20. During Prohibition, everybody knows the men's names: Capone, Ness, Dillinger. But what about the women who kept the speakeasies running? History simply erased them. Hospital records from Chicago and New York tell a story no one wants to hear. Most of these women entered that life between the ages of 16 and 22. They stayed for 2 to 5 years, and they were 3 times more likely to die before 35 than women in legal jobs. The causes were violence, alcoholism, untreated diseases, and overdoses from alcohol-based medicines that circulated freely. None of them became movie characters. None got a biography. Prohibition created an entire economy in the shadows, and these women were a central part of it. But 2 forces worked together to erase them: the sexism of that time and the convenience of telling only the male version of history. Some died violently. Most survived and grew old in silence. But silence doesn't mean they didn't exist.